Hey guys, are you looking for a sportsbook that you can trust? Well, look no further than mybookie.ag, where you can get a 50% match on your initial deposit of up to $1,000 when you use promo code DFSArmy. As a bonus, when you use promo code DFSArmy, you also get a free month of DFS Army VIP and DFS Army Beat the Bookie membership. That's a $100 combined value. So we'll help you with your daily fantasy sports and we'll help you with your handicapping. Free when you sign up for mybookie.ag using promo code DFS Army.
In 2015, an elite DFS Army Commando unit formed to bring high-level DFS strategy to the masses. Today, hated by DFS sharks and lineup sellers alike, they continue their quest to turn dope into DFS pros.
Welcome to Tacos Fast 40, presented to you by DFSArmy.com. Today I'll be going over Martinsville for the STP 500. Just real briefly, since this is coming out on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, with the qualifying being on Saturday night. We much prefer it being on a Friday night so we can get the pod out a little earlier, but that's the way it goes. It's kind of dumb to do a pod before we get the qualifying times out there. So we're here Sunday morning right before the race, and there's going to be some big changes to the field that come around 10 or 11 EST in the morning. And maybe by the time you're listening to this, we'll already know the news of tech this week, but it's the first impound race of the year, meaning that they have the practice sessions before qualifying, and guys pretty much stay out in race trim for the practice sessions, and then they go into qualify, and then they're not allowed to touch the cars until the next morning, and they can have their qualifying times disallowed if they don't pass the technical inspection. So those guys will be sent to the back and scored from the back as far as DraftKings scoring goes. So it could possibly change a whole lot. We've got projections up on the Domination station ready to go. We're just waiting on news. We've seen as many as 13 cars going to the back in a single race last year. And sometimes we don't see any, or maybe just one or two that were kind of scrubs anyway, and things won't change too much, but it's all up in the air. We don't know, who is pushing the limit a little too far. If you know these guys, you know that they're always pushing it to the limit with everything, be it on pit road or, with their setups in the car. They're always there to push it to the limit. But before I get down into breaking down how the scoring is going to be quite different at Martinsville, just got to remind you that at DFSArmy.com, go there using the link in the description. If you find this all helpful and you want to check out our research station, Domination station lineup optimizer. Research stations we'll be referencing throughout this pod. Our friend Nilly has a cool lineup generator tool that you can use as well. And of course, your DFS Army subscription will come with access to all of our coverage for all of our different daily fantasy sport offerings. We do the truck series and Xfinity series. We just had that truck race yesterday. And we do a baseball, basketball, you name it. We cover it. It's all included in one cheap price for the DFS Army VIP membership subscription. So definitely come check that out and use promo code TACO on sign up to support the podcast and get a lifetime 20% off discount. Looking at how scoring here is different than at other tracks. There are 500 laps to be had here, and we've seen time and time again the main Dominator at this track is pretty much going to make or break the slate for you. You might absolutely need them to cash if they're high owned enough and they score enough laps. In this race last year we saw Joey Logano lead 309 laps. And that's not the only time we've seen someone lead over 300 laps. We've had 4 guys in the last 10 races lead over 290 laps and score 150 to 180 fantasy points and on DraftKings. So that's going to it's going to be absolutely huge to get your Dominators in there. There are 375 Dominator points to go around on DraftKings compared to the average amount of around 200 Dominator points, for like an intermediate oval. Or at the 2-milers like we had last year, there were 150 Dominator points to go around. And, even at a place like a road course, there could be as low as like 80 or even 70 fantasy points to go around. So, it's a much, much, much bigger factor here with all of these laps. It makes a huge change on FanDuel as well. You'll notice that everybody is going to score a ton of points because they're getting that 0.1 fantasy point per lap. And, over there, they don't have the fast laps. The leaders, the guys leading the race, will definitely separate themselves and be, if you want to cash in FanDuel GPP, you absolutely have to nail the Dominators perfectly. The guys leading laps, not just the guys collecting fast laps. They've got to be out in the lead. You got to have those guys. A very interesting trend that we see on FanDuel is Martinsville is both number 1 in average percentage of FanDuel fantasy point distribution to guys in the top 10. So of all of the fantasy points available, a guy starting in the top 10 will get around 6.5% of all the available fantasy points, and that's more than at any other track. But also the guys in the bottom 10 also get the highest distribution of fantasy points compared to the rest of the field relatively. And it's not really even that close either. This place in Bristol with the 500 laps each, they both have about a 4.6% of the fantasy points going to each of the bottom 10 drivers. And the closest mark outside of that would be the Richmond race, which has the 3rd most laps. Richmond and Dover having 400 laps, so it's pretty much on FanDuel. The less laps that you have, the more guys in the middle of the pack that you can start. And here at these tracks with a whole bunch of laps, you really want to pick guys from the very back and just punt and go for all the pure Dominators starting up front. The best of the best. Get as many of them as you can in your FanDuel lineup, because that's just how the scoring goes here, and you absolutely cannot make a mistake. A DNF will completely ruin your day on FanDuel. There's some crazy stats like you can see pretty much everyone gets about 40 or 50 fantasy points as about a floor. You see guys starting 31st through 35th. There have been 60 of those guys in the past 10 races, and 97% of the time they've scored over 50 fantasy points on FanDuel. And, it's pretty comparative to mostly everybody. The higher up a guy starts on FanDuel, the more they're going to score pretty much on average. And we really only see the 90-plus point scores out of guys starting in the top 5, and especially the best of the best drivers. But if you have any driver on your lineup that has a problem, that is going to completely ruin your FanDuel day. Those are going to be the guys that don't score much, the guys that don't finish the race. They'll be easily outscored by like a guy running around in last place at least finish most of the laps, even if they had led laps before. DNF is just absolutely killer over there. On DraftKings, however, you can have a guy dominate a portion of the race, and then they crash and finish last, and they could still be in the optimal lineups just based on that. We see a much bigger spread than usual as far as fantasy points going to the best of the best drivers and the guys starting up front. Something we did add to the research station this week that's pretty cool is averages by the 5 starting positions like we had before, but they're separated. You can see what fantasy points numbers and, the averages and stuff for guys that start in, say, like the top 5 positions, 5th through 10th position, etc. And you can see how that affects people, how likely they are to finish in the optimal in DraftKings, and how many laps they finish on average, how many lead and fast laps they have on average and stuff like that. But now we have it broken down as well by 3 tiers: the studs, the mid tier, and the scrubs. So the studs are anyone with 90 or more in season long average driver rating. So your Kevin Harvicks and Kyle Bushes of the world, pretty much anyone around like a Denny Hamlin level or so or higher, the guys that are actually in contention to lead laps for the most part. Then you've got the mid-tier guys, which are guys in between 50 and 90 in driver rating for the year. These will be your William Byrons and Chris Bushers, that mid-range of driver generally, your Ryan Newman, sort of guys. And then you've got the scrubs, so anyone under 50 driver rating for the year. That's a pretty good mark for that. Just guys that don't really have any real chance. So you can see, it's something that had kind of, been a little obfuscated before. You'd have, stars that start in the very back. Guys that'll obviously lead laps and stuff. They'll go to the very back, and they'll throw off the numbers for the guys starting in the back. But now you can see, when we've only had, say, 4 instances where guys started 26th or worst, being a stud going in, and those guys, outside of one spot where it looks like a guy crashed, those guys generally do pretty well. You can see like their averages and stuff, and the different sample sizes we have for different groups. And if you have a guy and you're wondering what his expected outcome is, you can pretty much look to his tier rating, where he's starting, and get a general idea of how guys in that tier tend to finish just based on where they're starting. So as far as roster construction goes this week, let's just take a look at just some historical data to kind of get a sense of what goes on at this race. So we can go to the historical performances tab, something I like to do, and maybe just uncheck all the guys that led under, say, 10 laps. All right, you can see all the different Dominators year to year, race to race. So just going to go over the last few races and kind of just explain what went down here. Starting with the fall races and then going into the spring race. So starting with last year's fall race, this was right in the final stage of the championship, final 4 round. And Joey Logano dominated that, and it was pure domination from him with 309 lead laps, 51 fast laps. We don't see the Dominators here lead quite as many, or have quite as many fast laps as we do at some other tracks, but they'll still get a decent amount. Those are kind of spread around a little bit more. There's not really much of a clean air factor that would lead to the leader just racking up fast laps. Maybe in the very beginning, since they won't have any traffic to worry about. But sometimes that'll go down to things like guys that have short run speed versus long run speed. Something we'll kind of see. Some guys will start off or run well and get some fast laps, and we'll see them kind of fade out, and other guys kind of rise up. Sometimes just whoever had a really good run around the track. They can be a little bit more widely distributed. They don't just necessarily go to the guy leading all the laps. And we can kind of see that here where Logano had 309 lead laps, but came 3rd in fast laps. He had 51 fast laps, as where Hamlin, who only had 31 lead laps, had 76 fast laps. And Truex, who only had 18 lead laps, had 58 fast laps. And we also saw Kyle Busch, who led 100, have 48 fast laps. And looking at this spring race last year, Clint Boyer won that, leading 215 laps with 75 fast laps. But Kyle Busch actually led in fast laps with 77, but he was the 4th and pretty much only Dominator out there. He only led 24 laps, but had those 77 fast laps and led the way in that. That's where we had Denny Hamlin lead 111 with 42 fast laps, and Ryan Blaney led 145 with only 30 fast laps. And we've seen pretty much 3 Dominators be the way the last 2 races went here. Going back even further, in 2017, the fall race, there were pretty much 4 Dominators again. Kyle Busch lead 180 with 60 fast laps. Chase Elliott led 123 with 67 fast laps. Keselowski 108 laps led with 109 fast laps, and Logano leading 59 with 60 fast laps. Going back to the spring race in 2017, this one, half of the race was pretty much led by Kyle Busch, 274 lead laps with 91 fast laps, and Keselowski with 116 lead laps and 90 fast laps. I think we had a bunch of very small, short-lived Dominators in Truex, Hamlin, Larson, Elliott, all leading under 50 lead laps, but still coming in with some decent... they didn't come in with a whole lot of fast laps, except for Elliott, who had 38. So, it kind of goes back and forth year to year, race to race, and what happens. Again, we saw 2 big Dominators in 2016, and then, or pretty much 3. Jimmy Johnson led 92 as well, so 147 to Truex, 176 to Matt Kenseth there. In the 2016 spring race, this is what we'll go back to here. Kyle Busch led pretty much most of the laps there, a good majority, led 352, won the race with 81 fast laps. Harvick had 72 lead, 71 fast laps, and Kenseth had 45 lead, 48 fast laps. So you can kind of see here, generally you're going to want a few Dominators. More Dominators than at any other track. I guess Bristol can be sort of the same way, but here you see this domination can be spread around a little bit better than at Bristol. There are a lot less devastating sort of DNFs and crashes. People finish more of their laps here than at Bristol. There are a lot of skirmishes and crashes. Ranks 18th out of 23 tracks in percentage of the race run under caution. It's pretty similar to Bristol in that way. It's also, they're not as bad as things like Daytona and Talladega, but, there's still a lot of little accidents that go on, but they're usually small or inconsequential. At the spring race last year, they had a green first and second stage before having like a 1-car incident in the third stage. So we have seen some much quieter races, and recently we have seen a lot of risk aversion in the field and a lot of long green flag runs, and we'll want to see the prop that'll come out today, the over under on the number of cautions. We usually, last week we saw it at 6.5 and knew that Vegas didn't think there were going to be very many cautions, sort of like the last several races, and there'll probably be more. It'll probably be around like 8 or 9 or so for this one, because usually there are a bunch of smaller things that go on. There's a lot of bumping that goes on at these smaller tracks here. Let's talk about the short track racing here in general, actually. I feel like I haven't talked much about that here. Martinsville is one of the 3 concrete tracks in NASCAR. They're all the shorter tracks. Bristol and Martinsville are concrete, and Dover also is. That's a 1-mile oval there. This is about a 15-year-old surface. Last repaved in 2014. And is the slowest track on the NASCAR circuit, only going around 80 miles an hour or so. But with the changes, with the large rear spoiler and the the overall changes to the package this year, allowing for a lot of downforce and just generally higher speeds. We expected a lot of records to be broken, and the speeds were just a lot faster than we had last year. So it's going to run a little bit faster and just be a little bit different than last season. But generally at short tracks, especially ones like these where the aerodynamics of the car do not really come into play, a lot of it boils down to driver skill and how comfortable they are. on shorter tracks. It's a bit of a mentality. There are some guys that kind of own the track, and for this one in particular, it's one that takes some time to figure out. And then for some veterans, a lot of them have described them pretty much having a light bulb going off in their head when it comes to these sort of tracks, and they suddenly just start doing well at it. We've noticed that Kyle Busch, that's something that he's mentioned has happened to him at this track, and it definitely shows with his results here. And the difference between this track and Bristol is it's very flat, 12 degrees in banking, as where Bristol is 30 degrees in banking, so it's a lot faster. Just a completely different style of race. We don't even include Bristol in the splits that we're using for this week. It's important to look at the other short and flat tracks, but really looking at Martinsville in particular. History at Martinsville is going to be really good stuff to go off of. We race it twice a year, and there are tons of laps to really go off of. We're looking at the practices this week. We definitely want to look at the longer run speeds. Got the 15 and 20 lap averages up in the research station for most of the drivers in the field. We even got a sneak peek at like 30 lap averages from the Mike Joyce Twitter account. And Truex was actually number one in that. Which is something we'll talk about here later when we get up to the drivers here, which I'd better hurry and get to. We're about 20 minutes into this podcast, and again, I'm trying to keep it shorter since I know this will be posted day of the race. So let's just go to the field here real quick. Just keeping in mind the strategy for both sites being pretty much on FanDuel, you're wanting to pretty much punt hard and just go with the studs that are going to dominate the race. Can't stress that enough. They can finish as long as they finish decently but lead laps, they'll be good to go. And other than the guys that lead the laps, you need the guys with the good place differential. It kind of will come into play a lot more on FanDuel this week than it will on DraftKings. On DraftKings, you just have to have the dominators, not only the guys getting the lead laps but also the fast laps. There are 500 fast laps to go around, but we'll have like cautions and stuff. So really they're about 450 or so, give or take some, depending on the amount of caution flags, where obviously no fast lap will be awarded. If there is a fast lap, then somebody will be in trouble there. But on DraftKings, the main strategy there, of course, place differential comes into play a little bit more, but we've got some really big price tags on some guys that could really potentially lead a lot of laps here. You might find yourself punting a little bit heavier this week, and guys in the back might be a little bit more in play than usual. We know that's the case on FanDuel. They don't do too shabby on DraftKings either. It's they do just about average, if not slightly better than average here. It's just the need to go to the top 10 and get the more expensive guys is a lot higher than at other tracks. But it's not like Darlington where the you want to pick the guys at the very front, but the guys in the back are going to be absolutely screwed. There's a lot more variance in play at Martinsville. There's also a lot more equality when it comes to like equipment and aero and stuff. A lot of this will come down to driver skill, and they'll be able to flex their skill without necessarily having to focus too much on equipment. It's a bit like restrictor plate racing in that way, but not entirely. It's not that even across the board. You still have to be good at you still have to have a pretty decent car out there, be able to get like speed and stuff, but your skill will definitely come into play a lot more than we're used to at a regular like intermediate track. So going into the field here, just going to go down DraftKings scoring, starting with a brand new high price for a guy, Kyle Busch, $13,000. Could not be looking much better after 2 straight victories to seal off the West Coast swing there. And this is a track where he has finished top 5 7 races in a row ever since injuring himself in early 2015. He's come back to this track with a vengeance. Definitely has some clocks in his big trophy case where his 200 NASCAR trophies reside, and he picked up another one just yesterday at the truck race. Just absolutely destroying that thing like he usually does in trucks. Won this fall race in 2017 and this year's spring race in 2016. Again, like I said, just always in the top 5. At over his last 16 races at short and flat tracks, out of every 500 laps, he's led 138 of them with 65 fast laps. That's absolutely huge. If he comes anywhere near that, that would be a must roster sort of deal. He's about 4-1 in the books right now, but we'll see how that updates tomorrow. Definitely something you want to check out for there, and also see potentially the top 5 odds. We got those last week, and really hope to get those this week. If you're looking at just Martinsville, it would be for every 500 laps, he leads 93 with 42 fast laps. Still really, really good. He's put up the 350 lap performance. And, that's something he's capable of. He's pretty much got the best crew out there and the best car, and he's just the best at short tracks. I had mentioned before, and this will pretty much always reign true. It's like, at a short course, at a short track, you just play Kyle Busch. Like, it's pretty much that simple. They're making it hard with him being $13,000, but he just paid off like a $16,000 price tag in trucks with half the laps. So, not saying that he has the advantage here that he has in trucks. That'd be silly, but his car is still really, really good. JGR and Penske both have just dominated this season so far, and this is a track where those two teams have dominated historically as well. He was 5th in the board in first practice, 18th in the board in second practice, but it was so much better than it seems. If you're just looking at single lap times this week, you're kind of making a mistake here. Kyle Busch was first in 5 lap averages in first practice, and then second behind only Truex in 10 and 15 lap averages. Didn't quite get a 20 lap run out there. And then top 5 in all of these splits from 5 to 20 laps, kind of improving in each split, going all the way up to second in 20 lap speed. So the speed is obviously there with his car. He's starting back in 14th. Didn't have the best time in qualifying, but that's not going to be much of a problem here. If anything, it gives him I actually don't think it matters at all, the place differential, because really, if you roster him, you're rostering him expecting him to lead laps and dominate this race big time. The few amount of points that he's going to get in place differential, going from 14th to like second, that will be neat, but if he doesn't lead laps doing that, he is not going to be in the optimals. It's going to go to a guy leading the laps. That's most likely going to be a 10K plus guy like the Penske guys run underneath him, or Truex, Kevin Harvick, even Larson, Hamlin, those kind of guys. They still have to pay up for, and I really don't think Kyle Busch at $13,000 you're not going to get paid off using him without him leading a ton of laps. But him leading laps here it seems almost inevitable, pretty much. Looking at all of his races here, real quick. Kyle Busch. Yeah, so going from he's led fast laps in every single one of his last 10 races, with the 2 races in 2014 and then the fall race in 2015. Those are the only 3 that he's led less than 24, or not led, but had less than 24 fast laps here. In general, he'll get you around 25 to 90 fast laps. About 25 to 50 if he doesn't dominate. But if he does dominate, he'll get you anywhere between 50 and 100 fast laps. Usually a pretty darn safe when he dominates. And even in the spring race here last year, we saw him come second. Didn't lead a lot of laps with only 24 lead laps, but he did have 77 fast laps, and it got him 86.5 points on DraftKings. I think then you could have afforded to play him with Boyer there, and I think that was the optimal there. But it's gonna be a bit harder to do something like that this week. I guess if it is Boyer with the price there, but most likely it'll be another very expensive Dominator like a Logano or Keselowski or someone that does this. And I don't know if at 13K he'd exactly make it, but he would just need to have a pretty standard dominant performance with lead laps to get in the optimals, especially over there on FanDuel, with how similarly everyone scores outside of the difference of just lead laps there. And we've seen him lead 100 plus laps in 4 of the 10 races, with only 2 races where he did not find the lead. Did have the one race in the fall of 2016 where he had 3 lead laps, but other than that, looks pretty darn good. He always finds his way out front. You can expect him to lead, I don't know, anywhere between 25 to 400 laps, somewhere in there. So it's a pretty wide range. This is a race where it can go down a lot of different ways. This is not the most predictable of tracks. It is predictable in the sense that it's unpredictable. That's how we'll kind of put it here. But it is kind of easy to predict him finding his way out to the lead. He's Kyle Busch, and this is a short track. This is definitely his jam. Brad Keselowski here. This has also been a pretty good jam for him. 10th in this race last year, but other than that, over the last 6, he's finished in the top 5 outside of that 10th. And winner here in the 2017 spring race where he dominated. Averages 42.5 lead laps with 44 or 45 fast laps on average at Martinsville. And, he averages over 40 fast laps in both recent short and flat track performances and long term. This is one of his better track types. A little bit slower in practice, definitely. It's something we've seen with Keselowski. He tends to, him and Logano tend to not even worry about qualifying for the most part and kind of get some slower practice speeds and also just experiment all over the place. But I'm not terribly worried about it. He ended up qualifying 3rd. Could definitely find the lead. Yeah, he averages over 40 lead laps here as well. And it's at 12,400 on DraftKings and 13,700 on FanDuel. It's really hard to pay for him on both sides, but if you can, you definitely want to have a decent share of Keselowski. He gets a lot of Dominator points here. Probably the 3rd favorite to dominate here at this track. Probably actually similar in value to Truex when it comes to that, but starting up at 3rd, he might have a more direct path to Dominator laps kind of off the bat. So probably the 3rd most likely to dominate after Logano on the pole and Kyle Busch. At $11,900, we have Martin Truex Jr., who was blazing fast in practice. He starts 9th, but has some good long run speed in his car. 4th and 11th in single lap speed, but in first practice he was 2nd in 5 lap speed, and 1st in 10, 15, and 20 lap averages. And then in second practice, 1st in 5 and 10 lap speeds, and also in 30 lap speeds. And 2nd and 3rd in 15 and 20 lap speeds. Very, very fast car, especially on the long run. And the last fall race here, we saw the same thing from this car. We saw that long run speed. And, if you look at Truex's performance, get off Kyle Busch here, go to Truex. You can see, last year in the spring race, he scored 52 on DraftKings starting on the pole. Wasn't all that great, didn't hold on to lead very long at all, only led 4 laps there. But he was a necessary part of the fall race where he actually was one of those guys that started in the very back there, fought his way all the way up to the lead, led a good chunk of laps. Actually only led about 18 laps, but with 58 fast laps along the way, finishing 3rd for over 100 fantasy points. We have seen him lead a good chunk of laps here. Only once has he led over 42 laps, and that was in 2016, the fall race, where he started on the pole and led 147 laps. Has only broken 30 fast laps once here at this track, and that was the most recent race where he had the 58 fast laps. But if his car is tuned up like it was at that race most recently here at Martinsville, which wasn't all that long ago if you think about it, it was one of the last races of the year last year. This could be a good spot for Truex, and we see it in his long run speed in his car. It's going to probably really help him out here, especially if there isn't going to be as much carnage and you're going to have these longer green flag runs. So He's expensive now at almost $12,000. Like, they're really, really pricing up the studs this week because they know. But Truex probably is, it's going to be similar to Keselowski with Truex. He's just going to be a good spot of value that you don't want to get off of in GPP. But I don't really know if he makes cash, because in cash you kind of want to go Logano Busch. I'll talk about Logano here. Logano starts on the pole. Pretty good practice speeds, around 5th to 7th or so in all the different splits. But starting on the pole, and this is where he just crushed it last time out in the fall. Led the 300 laps and just, was absolutely a must-have for fantasy. Led to his championship right there. It also had he's kind of had an up and down history here, but mostly up. Just some crashes, but a lot of top 5 finishes. Not as many fast laps, but honestly, it's a good amount of fast laps for him compared to what he usually does at certain tracks. Averages 25 fast laps here, but it's a lot better than he does at some tracks. He does have a problem with not getting a ton of fast laps when he races, which is a DraftKings specific problem. On FanDuel, there's a reason he's 14,000 on FanDuel. He's looking like an amazing FanDuel play starting on the pole. But, for DraftKings, starting on the pole, he's just, even on DraftKings, he'll get those fast laps at first, you'd imagine. Unless he gets passed off the pole immediately, you can pretty much expect Logano to do some work and get a big chunk of Dom points off of the first stage, and even, hang around all race long. Not only is Penske strong here, just in general, we saw Blaney recently lead a good chunk here at Martinsville. So Logano, he's got his teammate Keselowski right behind him, starting in 3rd. It's pretty obvious, I think, that he's going to start and lead a good chunk of laps. He's got Eric Almirola next to him, and he'll be starting on the outside, which is really it's not a good advantage to have here. With it being a flat track, you definitely want to be on the inside. It's kind of a fight for the inside lane, which forgot to mention, it's another reason I like Truex Jr. this week, because that is like his skill set right there. But Logano can also very much do that, and should help him get past Almirola there, although Almirola looks kind of speedy in his own right. He just has absolutely no precedence of leading and stuff here, but could happen. I'll talk about him in a little bit here. Kevin Harvick, you got him starting in 4th. I don't think anyone's going to really use him. People have been quite off him as he's struggled to start the season so far, and he's kind of struggled here. He has yet to have a top 4 finish in his last 10 races. Finishing 5th in the 2018 spring race and 2017 fall race. Those are the only real good finishes we've gotten out of him anytime recently. Just has not had as much success here as at other tracks. He has dominated in some portions and could definitely dominate this week. He starts right behind his own teammate, Eric Almirola, with that all Ford starting 2 front rows. But, if he does find the lead, it's, it wouldn't be too crazy, but you would definitely be ahead of a lot of the field. So I don't think people are really enamored with Harvick's play right now. He's 16-1 in Vegas, which is a huge number for Harvick. You can tell they don't really like him here as much either right now. Speeds are just mediocre to okay in practice, ranging between 8th and 10th in speeds. So you're not really seeing a ton of long or short run speed from him, but he can be very confusing when it comes to practices. You've got Kurt Busch here starting back in 20th. Should be popular, but boy is he priced up now at $10,200. Practice times are not looking good. His teammate, Kyle Larson, also really struggles here. Has struggled here in the past. The last time we had a race here, Jamie McMurray, actually the spring race last year, I think it was, he just ran into tons of trouble with his car and ended up crashing. But, Kurt Busch has been amazing to start the season so far. I think personally he is a fade in tournaments because, look, the place differential is fine here. Going from 20th, he'll probably go up several spots and he could be a decent cash play. But at $10,200, I really doubt you're going to get the Dominator points that you need, and that's always been Kurt Busch's biggest struggle. So I'd be much more inclined to go to someone that I know can lead laps here, like Hamlin or Blaney for much cheaper. So Kurt Busch is probably a fade for me in GPP, and a lot of people are going to be flocking to him because his game log looks amazing right now, all top 10 finishes, and some of them being just because of gambles you took that paid off. It could look much different if some things didn't go his way, but Kurt Busch, that's just how I feel about him. I would like him, but he struggled here, 6th in the fall race, but before that he was held out of the top 10 in 8 consecutive races. I did win in the 2014 spring race, though, but, that was back when he was originally driving a Chevy for Stuart Haas there, but now he's driving a Chevy for Chip Ganassi Racing, who has struggled here just a little bit. I feel like McMurray has had some success here, but Kyle Larson pretty much never has outside of a 3rd-place finish in 2016, the spring race, and it's a decent enough segue to go right to Kyle Larson here. He's 40-1 on the books right now, just to give an example of how he is not favored right now. He's better at steeper tracks, ones you can go to the outside lane on. This is a track that is just not cut out for a guy like him at all. You can really see it. We saw some okay longer run speeds in the first practice session there, but they really fell off in the second practice session where he was in between like 10th and 15th. He's crashed out 2 of the last 3 races here, and outside of the 3rd-place finish, has no finishes better than 14th in 10 career races here. This is not the best spot for Larson at $9,700. I think he's still priced up, pretty decently. Start against 7th, I really don't see him dominating. I mean, it could happen. It can. I mean, he has led laps here in the past, but averages 4 per race. Even if he does, I think it'll be short-lived. I don't think that he really has shown that he has the car for this track right now. There's always a chance that things could just shake up his way and he finds the lead. And if you find the lead, and no matter how you get it, if you find the lead here, you can definitely lead a good chunk and find yourself out there for a while. But I would definitely put my money on Kyle Larson not doing that and him just being a waste of money. I'd much rather go to Denny Hamlin for $300 cheaper, $9,400. Starting in 5th, he is 10-1. Probably even looking to get better there. Really good at this track, has some really stellar finishes. Won the 2015 spring race, runner-up last year in this fall race. Averages almost 40 lead laps per race here. With over 100 driver rating, he's 5th in the field in average driver rating, behind only Logano and Jimmy Johnson, who is the king here, and then of course Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, and he's really good here. Better than guys like Kevin Harvick and Martin Truex Jr. historically, even Kurt Busch. This is near his hometown area where he grew up, like here in Loudon, just the northeast part of America. I don't know if he saves a little extra sauce for these tracks. He just so happens to be really good at these. We saw him lead some laps last week. Kind of a surprise out of nowhere, and he's a guy that nobody likes to roster much at all. But I think he's definitely worth some ownership here. He's on JGR, who is just a team that we were attacking pretty heavily this week, along with Team Penske. Just because they're the best cars in NASCAR right now. And Denny Hamlin, you can see he's got some decent longer run speeds. Not great short run speeds at all, but he does get faster as it goes deeper into the lap runs here. Someone that's going to be lower owned and it's at a track that he's really good at for a price that's fair. I like that, and I think his price on it's a FanDuel that's really expensive at $13,000. I would still play him there, honestly, because if he just so happens to lead, it's who you need. It doesn't matter what his price is. So I think he could be a nice, very low-owned play over there on FanDuel. You've got Eric Almirola at $8,700, starting runner-up to Joey Logano there on the pole, sitting on the outside. Kind of mentioned, he's got his teammate behind him, but so does Logano. We also saw him get out to some lead laps along with Hamlin is one of the surprises there. And he's looked fast so far this year. It seems like he belongs in the top 10, but he's not one to dominate quite. Has never led a lap here and really does not lead laps at this type of track. But, he's newer to having top tier equipment. Would usually finish between 15th and 20th here in his career. Last year, he finished 11th and 14th, so he's starting to get better here. And his long run speeds are actually quite amazing. So he only posted a 10-lap run in the first practice, but was top 3 in the board. And then 14th in single lap speed in final practice, but the long run speed was really good for him. First in 5-lap averages, second in 10-lap, and then first in 15 and 20-lap averages. Really, really fast car for him. So usually I do not like him for fantasy purposes unless he starts near the back because he lacks Dominator upside. And he has absolutely no precedence of leading laps, but he could definitely find the lead over Joey Logano to start out the race, and that wouldn't be too much of a surprise for me. He does have a pretty fast car. Stuart Haas did kind of unload fast, and his teammate Boyer dominated this race last year. So definitely have some Almirola in play. Set a minimum on the Domination Station lineup optimizer for sure. And of course, if you want access to that, remember, dfsarmy.com, promo code TACO, get you that lifetime 20% off discount. Can't let you guys forget about that. So speaking of Clint Boyer, that's who's next on the board. One of the best plays of the week. This is one of his best tracks as well when he doesn't get into trouble here. He is a top 10 threat every single time. The track really suits his racing style. Like I had said about him at the ovals we've been to recently. You just hold off on Clint Boyer until you get to these nice short tracks where you can play him. And this is definitely his playing grounds here. He's 11-1. Right now, it's better than the likes of Blaney, Almirola, Kurt Busch, Kevin Harvick, like significantly better odds than those guys. And this is definitely a place where he does well. The first practice session, he was second in 20 lap averages and first in just fast lap. He had the fastest lap of everybody. And in second practice, he was only 12th in single lap speed, but top 3 in 5 and 10 lap speeds. Kind of tailing off a little bit in 15 and 20 lap averages, but still someone who's looking to go up from 11th because he's a big top 10 threat and can lead laps as we saw last year when he led all those laps here. And this is, again, it's not just that last race where that spring race where he's dominated before. He's definitely a known entity here. He finished third and second in 2013 when we had first switched over to this package. So, or this generation of car. So this is definitely a spot where he can bang. And that was on, he had 4 top 10s in a row there, and that was on a much lesser Michael Waltrip racing team. So now in Stuart Haas racing equipment that's unloaded pretty hot, he's definitely someone you're going to want to get some exposure to at $8,400, very cheap. The problem is he's just going to be very popular as well. Cash games, definitely a guy you'll want to play. In GPP, you might maybe want to fade him for ownership, but you'd still definitely want exposure to him. Should just be a really solid play. Chase Elliott, $8,200. That's the cheapest we've seen him at in a very long time. I don't know what to really make of him here. Top 10 finishes in 3 of his last 4. Just got into trouble in the 2017 fall race. Fastest in single lap speed in final practice, which makes me hate him because that means he'll be over-owned as could be. And he has dominated here in the past before. He was top 6 in all of his 5, 10, 15, 20 lap averages in the first practice, but down to range between 9th and 12th in second practice. Starting 8th, I kind of want to fade him. He's been pretty disappointing for a while now. Just kind of starting in the top 10, going back to the teens through most of the race, and maybe sneaking in for like an 8th place finish at the end, but he hasn't dominated much recently for me. I know this is a place where Hendrick Motorsports has dominated in the past with Jimmy Johnson, but I don't really trust Elliott too much. I think with that fastest single lap speed in second practice, With that usually almost always leading to over ownership on a guy, I think I'm just going to look elsewhere there. I love you, Chase, but I can barely ever play you in daily fantasy, and it's just frustrating. Jimmy Johnson, $8,000. This is a place where he's won 9 freaking times. He's got so many clocks, he definitely knows what time it is, and the time is now. Not talking John Cena here, but I'm talking a different guy with his name starting J. It's Jimmy Johnson. Man, I really don't know what to make of him. Just another guy that's great at this track that is named after a football coach. The other guy, of course, would be Joe Gibbs, who's named after himself, who's also a football coach. It's I'm sorry, that was the first joke I could think of that came to my head concerning him, but, I mean, not a whole lot needs to be said about Jimmy here. His acumen here is well noted in history, but he is just not the driver he was before, especially over the last 2 years, and that is definitely shown in his finishes here. Won in 2016 the fall race. Since then, he's finished 15th in both spring races and 12th in both fall races. And that's about where he'll finish on average just right now. I know he's been racing a little bit better, but it's really hard to ignore how single lappy his speeds were, and we saw with his teammate as well. But in the final practice, he was 3rd in a single lap speed, but 29th in 5 lap average, 27th in 10 lap average, 22nd in 15 lap average. It's just not very well sustained speed. Like in first practice, he was 8th in 5 lap average, but 22nd in 10th lap average or 10 lap averages. But I think the only reason he's even priced up to 25-1 as it is are all of those titles, and the only reason I've seen people give for picking Jimmy Johnson this week is just saying, well, I'll take the guy with the most wins here. But at this track type, over the last 16 races, he's averaged 2 lead laps, and they're not even like very legitimate lead laps. It's just a place to not go this week. I don't really like picking Jimmy. I don't think he's going to lead laps, even though he averages 88 lead laps here. That's seeming like a thing of the past. His crew chief has moved on. If we see William Byron randomly win, I think we might have figured out the winning strategy there with this track, but I don't know. You're not going to see me on much Hendrick this week. Chevy is plus 500 or plus 600 to win. It's really up to the Fords and the Toyotas this week. That's just how I'm seeing everything going right now. We'll have to see, but I really doubt I'm playing Jimmy Johnson much at all. Eric Jones at $7,800. Looked pretty decent in that first practice. Not as good in the second practice, where splits were between 10th and 15th or so. But it's also, a place where he has struggled historically. He hasn't finished better than 12th yet. This is a track they don't go to in Xfinity. So something to note for guys like Eric Jones, kind of fresher out of Xfinity, and we've definitely seen it with Bubba Wallace here. They don't have much Xfinity practice here, and unless you've played it in trucks, you really haven't seen the track much. We've seen guys like Larson and Eric Jones and Daniel Suarez just struggle here initially. Some guys have yet to figure it out, like Matt DiBenedetto, and Bubba Wallace. We saw him finish 34th in his first 2 races here last year. Just not, not a place where rookies really pick it up very quickly. It's a place you have to kind of figure out first. And this is a place that Eric Jones could figure out. I'm sure he's definitely working on it. And starting 19th, that's a pretty good starting position. But at this track type, especially, I like Jones a lot better on the ovals. And he's 60-1 on the books right now. That is a very sketch line for him. I know it's just not the right track type for him, is what I think. Daniel Suarez at $7,600. Second in single lap speeds in first practice, but that was kind of a wash because he was 29th in 10 lap averages. And then it kind of reversed. He was 20th in single lap speed in the second practice, but top 10 in the 5, 10, and 15 lap averages there. Tailing off as it goes on to 13th and 20 lap averages. Starting 10th, I really don't like this play much at all. I know he finished 9th here last year, but just not really feeling it with the lack of long run speed, it would seem, in the car. 85 to 1, no thanks there. Alex Bowman, $7,400, starting 17th. That's not bad. He finished 17th here in the fall race and 7th in the spring race. He could, he's someone that could definitely do decently at a track like this. Don't like that he was second to his teammate Elliott, sandwiched in between Elliott and Johnson in the single lap speeds. I know Hendrick was messing with some qualifying trim or something that might kind of threw things out, just trying to get good qualifying times for their guy, and they actually succeeded with Byron. He was the one guy that didn't have the top lap speeds in the final practice, so a little bit confusing there, but outside of those fast laps, they really were kind of crappy throughout practice. Bowman, I like him starting 17th. I think it's FanDuel where I like him a lot. Yeah, he's cheap over there, $8,600. That's not a bad price. I don't mind him over there. And he's fine on DraftKings. You'll need to rotate him in plenty of spots, and he's a perfectly fine play. I just don't like playing him for a lot of the same reason I faded Chase there. Just second in the final practice speeds will kind of bump him up artificially. And, trying to run through the field here real quick. I really didn't want to go over an hour, but we're kind of pushing it. We've got we've got Austin Dillon, one of the most important plays to talk about here. Starting 30th, where he finished last year in both races. Finished 30th and 30th. But before that, he had, exclude one crash in the 2015 spring race, all top 20 finishes with some top 5s thrown in there too. Starting 30th, there's no way. He definitely moves up. He had just gotten into trouble, over his last couple of races. I will safely discard that. I don't really care. He was 4th in the final practice. Another one of those kind of misleading guys because he had no long run speed here. 23rd in 15 lap averages, 19th in 20 lap averages. But still, starting 30th, that's some free cheap value at $7,300. His price tag has dropped from $8,000. He's just so cheap now. It's definitely going to be an important building block in lineups, and with some carnage, and even just through moving up naturally, he's going to get a lot of place differential. Good play on DraftKings and on FanDuel where you're looking for some place differential this week. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr., $7,200. This place has been his curse for so long. In 2017, he got it figured out, finished 10th both races, and then went back to just crashing last year. Crashed in the spring race. And leading up to those two top 10s, or the two 10th place finishes in a row, he had crashed 4 times in a row and 7 times in his previous 8. He crashes here a ton, and sometimes he doesn't even crash. He just finishes really poorly. This is his worst track, and it looked like he was really slow too in first practice. 29th on the board and 31st in 10 lap averages. Yikes, but seemed to get figured out a little bit in final practice. 9th on the board with 20th place 5 lap speed, and about 16th place 20 lap speed. Still really dicey, really shaky. I don't like playing a lot of Stenhouse, but I think people fade him a lot, and he's starting 25th. That's where he is bait. I remember the 2016 season, he started dead last here and then finished dead last by crashing right away. I mean, that's, I like to ignore DNFs, and, it paid off in 2017, but man, it's just, this is a place where, Stenhouse is so good at Bristol, and he does so poorly here. And you also see that in Matt DiBenedetto, the same thing. So good at Bristol, so poor here, because he's just someone that really benefits from the added banking and stuff, and just does not really bang all that well here. But I choose to believe that, I think it is correct that a lot of this stuff is just random variance that has just so happened to him, and he's probably a pretty good bet to make. He's been a lot faster this year. He's got a teammate now who has been really, really good here at this track in Newman that might have shown him some things, and just definitely working on it. This is a pretty important track to a lot of people, and I'm sure he's focused on getting a little better. So starting 25th, don't mind him much on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, you might want to take a big pause before using too much recce here, because that's him crashing at all would be just a killer. His average FanDuel points per race is probably the worst of anyone in the field. I can guarantee you that. Outside of like the super scrubs. You've got Paul Byron. Oh my gosh, I mixed up Paul Menard and William Byron. Well, they're both kind of the same play in my books. Paul Menard starting 15th, just a little high for me. Should finish around there, if not a little bit lower. Just not huge on him right now. Then you got William Byron starting 6th, who's just a big no play for me. Crashed very early in the fall race, 20th in the spring race. He also crashed in the first practice session, went to a backup, starting 6, and that's just way too sketchy for me. I really, really, really doubt he leads laps here. $6,800, that's a much better play in my book. Ryan Newman, 85-1 the books. That's about as good as Daniel Suarez for reference. Starting 21st. He has finished better than that in 8 straight races here. 8th in the most recent race in the fall. Looked really good in that race. Also 8th here in the 2017 spring race. Has some top 10 upside here, but starting 21st. Really just needs to get in the top 15. He'll do good for $6,800 on DraftKings and on FanDuel. This is just a place where he can score well and will likely finish pretty well. It's also a pretty good FanDuel play. His racing style is very, very helpful here with his ability to block and block hard. I really like Newman for that, and his longer run speeds actually look somewhat decent for a guy so far down here. I've got Daniel Hemrick, who has been, kind of all over the board lately, but starting back in 29th, a really safe starting spot for him. His 4th and 5 lap averages, but that really fell off. 24th and 10 lap, 25th and 15 lap. Not too sure of what to make of Hemrick here. The practice times are kind of all over the place. But he's shown some pretty decent chops. 18th in Phoenix. I'm definitely willing to give a shot to him. Starting 29th. Can definitely move up pretty easily here. Just has to avoid making dumb mistakes. And kind of worried that he has very, 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 very limited experience here. So I'm going to kind of proceed with caution. But he'll definitely be a guy rotate in at this track. You've got Chris Buescher at $6,500. I was looking very fast in practice, but qualified 13th, just a little bit too high for me. I know he finished 13th here in this race in the fall, and 11th in the 2017 spring race, but for the most part, he's, it's kind of iffy if he's finishing top 20. Definitely moving down from 13th. Well, not definitely, but very likely, and not much of a top 10 threat. He is cheap this week, but I don't see him being the play that you need from down here. You just want a little bit more place differential. Matt DiBenedetto at $6,300. His best finish here is 29th in 8 attempts. You figure at least once you get lucky with carnage or something, or just surviving past people, because you see guys like McDowell, Reagan, Castle, these guys are putting up top 25s at this track, and that's just never materialized for Matt DiBenedetto. Top 30 is the best that he can possibly do here, and just barely at that. For the last 4 races, 36th, 32nd, 39th, and 35th, and 32nd, just consistently bad here. It kind of makes me worry a bit for Corey LaJoie, who's already going to a backup, but he's in that 32 car that DiBenedetto's done this all with at this track, and just like Stenhouse, so good at Bristol, but so bad here. Practice times, they were decent in practice 1. I made some long sessions. Practice 2, the speeds were between 20th and 27th, 12th in single lap speed, but starting 22nd, I'm not too confident that he's going up from there. I think he might go backwards. Just if this is a place where driver skill really shows through, and he's shown repeatedly that he has no skill here. I'm sorry, Matty D. I usually love you, but this is your worst track, I think. Ryan Preece, starting 16th. He is in that 47 car that AJ Allmendinger drove the crap out of here. This race last year, he was constantly riding in the top 10. The problem is Priest. He's not like Hemrick where he has like no experience here. He did race a race here in 2015, finishing third to last there, or second to last, finishing 42nd with a quick DNF there. So it's a little bit of experience. He's at least been here before, drove around, but he's in a very good car for this. But I think a lot of the reason the car had the success was because of AJ Allmendinger, who's such a good flat track racer and road course racer. Priest, no, he's not the same guy. Is pretty good in Xfinity and stuff at like short tracks, but starting 16th, it's a risky endeavor. I wish it was Allmendinger. That would just make this so much easier, but at the same time, he would have a much higher price. He'd be in like the 7Ks as well, so I don't know if I can play too much Priest, but I will have a little piece just because of the car he's riding around here. Ty Dillon, he has $6,100. I wish he wasn't 6th in single lap speed in final practice, but he was. 26th in 10 lap average to kind of show you where he really is speed wise. 15th here last year. Just kind of survived a good portion of this race, and he is better at short tracks. I'll give him that for sure. Before that, 22nd, 30th, and 22nd. In this track type, you can expect him to run around where he's starting there at 23rd and probably finish in that little range too. At $6,100, he might be cheap enough where if he does have another top 15, he could be in the optimal in the nuts. So someone I will get a little exposure to, but, again, the final practice single lap speed makes me want to fade him, just like a lot of the guys that had that random, top 10 in the single lap speeds. Just not interested, more interested in the long run speeds for sure. You've got Michael McDowell at $5,900. Slow throughout practice and just horribly unlucky this season. But he has 3 straight top 25 finishes, or really 6 straight top 26 finishes here. Starting 24th, you can expect him to kind of finish around where he starts if he doesn't get into trouble. And with a better race, he might move into around the 20th place position or so. $5,800 or $5,900. Someone you'll have a little bit of exposure to in multi-entry, but not someone I'd get too invested in, honestly. Average running position at this track at 25th, so it's actually worse than where he's starting there. But he's in the 34 car, the Castle machine, that he had a lot of success at this track in this car. Over the last 2 years, he's not done well here at this track in the 0-0 Jeffrey Earnhardt machine, but just his finishes before this 2018 season for him, the finishes in the 34 car for him, 23rd, 27th, 29th, 28th, 21st, 19th, 25th, 29th. So all those top 30 finishes in a row for Castle, and that's from, Castle is like a back-end guy who would be very lucky to finish top 30 a lot of the time. So, we also saw last year with this car from McDowell, he finished 25th and 21st. I mean, a little bit of upside here, but I wish he was starting a little bit further back like he was last week, and I'd be more in on him. You got Bubba Wallace at $5,800. I think he's cheap again on FanDuel. He's $4,500 again. McDowell is too. I kind of like him over there. McDowell for FanDuel at such a cheap price. But Bubba Wallace, again, he's been unlucky here, just getting into trouble. He's actually... he actually did finish most of his laps here. He really got behind, got several laps down. Something you'll see from a lot of guys, and just never really recovered too much. Was running longer runs in practice, but just really didn't show much speed. It's hard to have too much confidence in Bubba here, especially at a place where, I don't know, he's had success here like years back in the trucks. We definitely saw that, but he wasn't, he looked all right in the truck race, but not, like winning the race level like we had saw from him a few years ago. But he actually had a couple of Truck Series wins here. Those from like 2014, 2015 or so. I'll have some shares in GPP, starting 27th. There's some upside there. Just not too confident about the play. I keep ending up on, honestly, down this range. If I'm not just punting super hard, I'm going to David Reagan. Starting 26th, 18th in this race last year, 25th race before that. Has a 5th and a 10th place finish from 2015, the spring race, that 5th place finish, and 10th in the 2014 fall race. Some randomly really good finishes for him. 17th in final practice, and around 20th in the 5, 10, and 15 lap averages. Not really too shabby from him in his front row motorsports Ford. This track type, should move up a little bit just given his expectations there, starting around 26. Should finish around 20th to 22nd, somewhere in that range, and potentially a little bit higher, maybe in the very high teens. And at $5,600, that's significantly cheaper than his teammate McDowell, who I think he's in a little bit better of a spot than, and has been much faster in practice than. Ran more laps and everything. I really like Reagan there at $5,600, and I don't think the ownership for him gets too crazy either. He's considerably more expensive on FanDuel than McDowell, but on DraftKings he's cheaper than McDowell, so I really do like him there. Ross Chastain finished 29th in this race both times, starting 31st. It's pretty much what you can expect from him. I would not be surprised if he finished 29th again. That feels about right. And that's not going to get you much here, honestly. It's not even going to save you a ton of money at $5,500. I would much rather punt cheaper. You've got Corey LaJoie at $5,400. He's had some good finishes lately. Will go to a backup car, probably go in the rear of the field. Gets to start 35th, which is cool. But remember, this is a backup car, and this is the 32 that Di Benedetto just repeatedly struggled with really hard at this track. And I don't know how to really attack him, because I wanted to play him. He was 18th in the 5 lap averages, 22nd in just overall speed in that first practice session. Now I don't know how I can trust a backup on a team that has never had success here in the past. LaJoie has finished 33rd and 28th here in 2017 when he was racing for BK Racing. Pretty much what you can expect. Probably same sort of expectations that Chastain has. Maybe a little bit more upside, but maybe a little bit more downside as well. It's going to be volatile with him. And then Matt Tifft, $5,300. Probably the play I'm going to the most down here. Just makes a lot of sense. Has been doing pretty well recently. Just decent finishes when he has finished so far this season. Made some really long runs, kind of like what I'm seeing. 24th and 10 lap averages. Starting 32nd. It's such a cheap price. That's probably the punt that you want to make there. So he'll be making a lot of my lineups. Landon Castle at $5,200. He's starting 28th, which is a shame. I don't think he can move up much higher than that. He has that history here of the top 30s, but in this car it has been rough for him. So I'll have some, but not too much. Doesn't look great in practice either. He's like 32nd in pretty much every single split. So he's looking to finish 32nd like he did in this race last year. Cody Ware at $5,100. Usually just a complete fade, but starting dead last at a place where he can just run around and survive at. That's, somewhat appealing, I guess. But, faster than Kennington in practice. That's what he's got going on for him. He's not the worst, not the slowest this week, like usual. And DJ Kennington, $5,000. The slowest the slowest car in practice. But the thing he has going for him is last year he finished 27th and 28th here just by surviving. He's like 8 to 10 laps down, but just by surviving past people at DNF, that's how you go up here. And Kennington, he's good at doing that. He does that at several different places. I won't fade him completely. I don't like the play at all, but I don't think I'm fading anyone completely this week, which is kind of weird. Maybe just William Byron, but that's with the added variance. That's kind of what you do down low, especially with the need to punt so hard for Kyle Busch. And if he dominates with another expensive guy, you might have to go with a guy like Ware or Tifft or Castle, something like this. And then finally, the cheapest guy on the board, $4,900. Starting 33rd, Jeb Burton. Finished 33rd here in this race in the fall last year. And back in 2015, he finished 29th and 27th when he was racing regularly. I've not seen much of him at all recently. A little bit of, Xfinity, I think. But not too much going on for him there. The 52 Chevy, that's not terribly fast, but slightly faster than the likes of Ware and Kennington. Just going to be a pure punt play for getting guys like Kyle Busch in the lineup, but I don't completely hate it this week like I would some weeks. He could sneak up there, is perfectly fine. Not the worst bet you can make. So that'll do it for Taco's Fast 40. Be sure to tune in next week, but enjoy this race here at Martinsville. I love these short tracks. Definitely a good one to check out and watch. Really fun to watch short track racing. You will not regret it. So remember, dfsarmy.com, promo code TACO to get you a lifetime 20% off and support the pod. I will see you guys later.
Hey guys, are you looking for a sportsbook that you can trust? Well, look no further than mybookie.ag, where you can get a 50% match on your initial deposit of up to $1,000 when you use promo code DFSArmy. As a bonus, when you use promo code DFSArmy, you also get a free month of DFS Army VIP and DFS Army Beat the Bookie membership. That's a $100 combined value. So we'll help you with your daily fantasy sports and we'll help you with your handicapping. Free when you sign up for mybookie.ag using promo code DFSArmy.